Hi, this is Josh Herwick from First Baptist of Queen. Thank you for joining us as we journey through the Old Testament, reading and studying every single verse. Here, as we are in 1 Samuel chapter 15, where we've been for some time, and we're going to be for some time more. And overjoyed with how much God reveals every single week as we walk through these verses together. So here we are in 1 Samuel chapter 15. Starting in verse 14. And Samuel said, "What then is this bleating of sheep in my ears, and the lowing of oxen that I hear?" Saul said, "They have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God, and the rest we have devoted to destruction." Then Samuel said to Saul, "Stop! I will tell you what the Lord said to me this night." And he said to him, "Speak." Saul had just said that he had performed the commandment of the Lord. He performed the commandment of the Lord. And so this implies that he has fulfilled the Lord's instruction to the letter of what exactly the Lord wanted him to do. Samuel already knows about Saul's disobedience because of the Lord. The Lord had told him in a dream all about Saul's failure. And now not only does Samuel arrive knowing about the situation in which he is walking because of the Lord's word, but he also is made immediately aware by the noise of the animals. Either Saul and the men were so brazen as to not even try to hide their disobedience, or there were so many animals left alive that they could not be hidden. Either way, Samuel tells Saul that he doesn't need supernatural revelation to see the evidence of his disobedience. Then Saul does two things. First, he fully places the blame on the men. And as a side note, notice that at the end of the verse, when speaking about the obedience of devoting to destruction, he includes himself with the people in that part. So blaming others for his own actions is not at all the act of a leader, and it is a complete lie. You know, if you look back at verse 9, it says that Saul and the people spared both Agag and the animals when they had been specifically told by God not to do so. So Saul does what the people have been doing since the Garden of Eden. He tried to pass off the blame to keep himself out of worse trouble in the same way that Adam tried to blame Eve and Eve tried to blame Satan. Then secondly, here Saul tries to explain that the people only spared the animals in order to better worship the Lord. So he is saying that they disobeyed the Lord in order to worship the Lord. Obedience to the Lord is worship. It is as though in his excuse, Saul was trying to say that they knew a better way to worship the Lord than he did. Now they may have genuinely intended to sacrifice those things to the Lord, but it seems to be presented as though this explanation is simply Saul trying to talk himself out of getting caught red-handed in his disobedience. So Samuel's had enough of Saul's attempted excuses. He doesn't want to hear anymore, so he cuts him off. And Samuel asks Saul if he is now ready to hear the message that God had sent to him. And Saul finally shuts his mouth and allows Samuel to speak the Lord's word. Verse 17. And Samuel said, "Though you are little in your own eyes, are you not the head of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel. And the Lord sent you on a mission and said, 'Go devote to destruction the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are consumed.'" Now Saul thought so little of himself that he would heed the instruction of the people over the instruction of the Lord. Samuel reminds him of several things. First, Samuel reminds Saul of the obvious, that he is the leader of the nation. As the leader of the nation, he is supposed to lead the people, not be led by the people. He's supposed to direct them to follow the way of the Lord because, as Samuel reminds him, he, Saul, was anointed as king by the Lord and not by the people. Proverbs 29:25 says, "The fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe." The people didn't make Saul king, and he definitely did not do anything to earn the kingship. The Lord put him in his position. So his only care should be to please the Lord. Having been anointed by the Lord sent Saul on a specific mission to accomplish a specific purpose. He was supposed to remove the obstinately unrepentant sinners and all of the animals that they used in their detestable sacrificial practices. Saul was supposed to completely remove the sinfulness from among God's people, and instead he only increased the sin with his actions and the actions that he led the people to commit. Verse 19. Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord? Why did you pounce on the spoil and do what was evil in the sight of the Lord? And Saul said to Samuel, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord. I have gone on the mission on which the Lord sent me. I have brought Agag, the king of Amalek, and I have devoted the Amalekites to destruction. But the people took of the spoil, sheep and oxen, the best of the things devoted to destruction, to sacrifice to the Lord your God at Gilgal, or in Gilgal. So Samuel appears to be shocked at Saul's complete disregard for the Lord's command to him. He says that seemingly as soon as possible, Saul pounced on the plunder rather than obey the Lord by destroying it all. The imagery of pouncing brings with it the idea of the underlying motivation being almost uncontrollable greed. Samuel doesn't pull any punches. He flatly states that Saul's actions were undeniably evil. But Saul doubles down in his reasoning in an attempt to defend himself and justify his disobedient actions. He insists that he really did obey the Lord, and then he proceeds to give one of his acts of disobedience as proof of his obedience. He says that he obeys the Lord's command, or he obeyed it, to destroy every one of the egregious sinners by sparing the leader of the egregious sinners. Then he again tries to lay the majority of the blame for the disobedience at the feet of the people he was supposed to be leading. He tries to emphasize that the people only disobeyed so that they could better worship the Lord. For us today, reading Saul's excuses, the entire line of thinking seems to be crazy. How in the world could Saul even begin to think that disobedience was a better way to worship the Lord? If someone thought of pleasing the Lord with a checklist mentality, then they might rank checklist items in order of importance, similar to how we might rank items on a grocery list. We hope to be able to get everything on the list, but there are certain essential items that must be had. Possibly Saul thought that he could determine one thing is more important than another in his reasoning for making such an excuse, for surely burnt sacrifices were more important than simple obedient destruction. But this kind of thinking was a complete misunderstanding of what the Lord desired, as Samuel is going to go on to describe to him. Verse 22. And Samuel said, has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of divination, and presumption is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king. Burnt offerings and sacrifices mean nothing if the person making the offering has a heart turned away from obeying the Lord. Burnt offerings and sacrifices are not meant to be the end-all, be-all of worship to the Lord anyway. Burnt offerings and sacrifices are supposed to remind us of God's holiness and of our constant need for Him. So Samuel wants Saul to understand that burnt offerings and sacrifices are not the issue. The real issue is a heart that is turned to the Lord in obedience. An obedient heart is listening to the Lord more than a heart that simply wants to complete a checklist of items to stay out of trouble. The point of obedience is not to stay out of trouble, but rather to please and honor the Lord. And this concept is spoken by Samuel here of the importance of obedience over and above sacrifices. It would have been difficult for some to hear this, not just in Saul's day, but also among the Pharisees in Jesus' day, because the Pharisees, though in the same way as Saul, seem to have been thinking that they might have a better idea about how to please the Lord than did the Lord. So Samuel here, he makes quite an interesting statement, equating rebellion to divination and presumption to iniquity and idolatry. See, divination in the Hebrew, it means a prediction, a survey of future events. So to seek divination is to seek a pagan prophet or a seer or witch in an effort to know something about the future. Divination is never supposed to be sought because we are supposed to depend on the Lord for guidance into the future. And Samuel here links Saul's rebellion against God to the sin of divination because Saul's rebelliously sinful actions communicated his belief that he knew best how to determine what actions he should take for his future. Saul's decision, they were similar to divination in the sense that both reject the Lord's direction for some other guide. Similarly, Saul is incredibly presumptuous to think that he knew better than the Lord how the Lord might want to be worshiped. His presumption was evil and idolatrous because he had removed the Lord from his place as leader in Saul's own heart and replaced the Lord with himself. Saul had created an idol out of his own reasoning and the people's opinions. And Samuel tells him that this is the final straw. His disobedience had led to his eventual removal. Previously it did. And then in this chapter, it seems as though God gave Saul another chance. And Samuel tells Saul that in the same way that he chose to reject the Lord, now the Lord has rejected Saul and his family as the rulers of the Israelites. Saul chose his path and was going to have to live with the consequences, which is the same for all of us today. We can choose to go our own way and have the consequences of those actions fall squarely on our shoulders, or we can choose to follow the Lord and leave all the consequences to Him, as Charles Stanley says. Charles Stanley also said that if we follow the Lord, then He will bear all of the responsibility for our actions. What a relief and load off when we finally and fully embrace such a lifestyle. Thank you for joining us as we go through the Old Testament verse by verse. Join us again next week as we continue through here, finish out chapter 15, begin on into chapter 16, and see where the Lord will take us in His Word.